All right, so I like to do the assignments that I assign to my students. And so I think that gives me insight into the process that my students might have to go through. And it also allows me to point to a sample paper and say, this is exemplary. This is basically exactly what I'm looking for. So this is a vlog that I've done of writing a literature review paper based on the instructions that I gave my own students. And I do want to clarify this is a vlog, not a tutorial. So I'm not saying you should do the paper this way like I did it. I'm not even saying I should have written the paper the way I did. I'm just saying I did write the paper this way. These are the steps that I went through to get an end product that fit the assignment. So I hope that watching me go through that realistic process is useful or interesting to you. When I'm preparing to write a literature review paper is I'm looking at the assignment instructions on Canvas to make sure that I know exactly what I'm looking for. And when I was looking over those instructions, some of the things I noticed is that I'm going to use some of the sources that we read in class, but I also need to find 2 to 4 scholarly articles that are about my field specifically, which in my case is higher education. And so before I go looking for those sources, I need a research question. Like, I know that I'm doing it about telework and I'm doing it about teaching college, but I'm trying to figure out, like exactly what I want to find out about teaching college and telework. And one of the things I was thinking about, all of us had to switch to online. And one of the things that people talk about is that you're more isolated online. Like you're not getting those interactions with your students. You're not getting those interactions with your colleagues, at least not in the same way. And so that's what I'm thinking. I might do my research about some kind of social isolation. So I'm writing that down, and I'm thinking, I'm interested in the idea of comparing online instructors, like people who already have taught online, versus those who only teach seated classes. So that might be interesting to see if that sense of isolation was different for the people who experienced in person in class, who are experienced with online classes versus the people who hadn't taught online classes before. So I think that's a good direction I can go with my paper. So social isolation, and I probably should have written that in Sharpie, but social isolation, I think, is the issue that I want to work on in my paper. And so I'm going to need to find 2 to 4 scholarly articles that relate to higher education and social isolation. So that's my next step.
Okay, so now that I've decided on my topic, I'm ready to look for sources. So I've gone to the library page here, and I'm going to try higher ed faculty social isolation, something like that. Packing in some words. You don't want to ask a question, right, because it's just a computer. It doesn't understand your questions. And I'm going to also come over here. I need scholarly articles, so I'm going to click on Limit to Academic Journal. I'm going to change this publication date to something much more recent, 2010 to 2021, because I know that this is a topic, online teaching, that's changed a lot and didn't even exist in the past. And I'm going to also go down here to Limit by Topic. And I'm going to click on things that seem like they might be related to what I want. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the titles of these articles and see, how relevant they are. So this one's about graduate students on and off campus, and that's probably not what I want. I want to focus on the teachers, but I'm going to save that in case it has something that's relevant. And yeah, it looks like a lot of these are not really about what I want. And so I can go back and I can change some of my words to see if that helps. This one looks kind of helpful. Reflective study of online faculty teaching experiences in higher education. So that's going to be thinking about how they feel. Now remember, I said that my research question was going to be about, how the pandemic affected people's sense of isolation. And obviously you're not going to find many articles about that because it's so recent. But you can still find articles, I can still find articles that are about how people feel when they're teaching online in general. And then that more new stuff, that's something that I'm going to be able to maybe find when I do a survey of different people. So one thing that I would suggest is when you find a really good article that actually connects, if you go down to the Works Cited page, scroll through their Works Cited, because I was doing this earlier, and this particular article actually had some other sources that looked like they might be relevant. So I was able to look those up and put them in a working bibliography. And so what I've done here is I knew that I needed 2 to 4 sources for my final paper. So I figure I want to find at least like 5 or 6 to start with, because some of them probably won't be that great. And I've copied and pasted the citation information. I've got, my topic here. And so I've copied and pasted citation information and some notes about what the article was about, so that later when I come back to it, I'll kind of know what these articles are about, and I can kind of highlight them, read them later, cross them off if I don't like them. This one is only talking about student isolation, but if I can't find anything about teacher isolation, I can still in my lit review talk about student isolation and make connections. And I can say, if the students are feeling isolated, maybe the teachers do too. So, whatever you can find, don't feel like your articles have to be precisely answering your research question. Your articles need to be giving you information that will help you answer your research question. So that's my working bibliography. My next step is going to be looking through those articles to find actual information that I can use in my paper.
Okay, so I am working on finding information in my sources. And I decided that what I wanted to do first was I wanted to come up with some kind of an organization plan so that I kind of know what I'm looking for in my sources. And I find it easy to just jot this stuff down. And so my topic is the isolation of faculty. And I'm trying to think of an organizing principle. Am I going to try and do a cause-effect sort of thing? Is it something that's changed over time? Different subjects, different groups of faculty. And I guess what I came up with here was looking at what I found in the sources. Maybe I could do part of it talks about just online experience in general. Is that in itself isolating? Is that something that we can already expect? And there were some articles about students being isolated, so I think I can use that a short part about that, and then focus specifically on how faculty feel isolated, and maybe do that. I was thinking maybe how they might feel isolated from their students, from their colleagues, and then from the administration. The problem is I haven't actually read the articles yet. And it's kind of I could sit down and read 5 or 6 scholarly articles without knowing what I'm looking for in them, other than the general idea of isolation. But that's I don't want to do that. And so what I've got here is my plan. So I wrote on each piece of paper, this one, I'm going to read through the articles and I'm going to write down what I find about this and what page in the article it's on that I can come back to. And this is how I'm taking my notes. And that way when I'm reading them, I'm reading with a purpose. I'm not just, it's just really boring to just read from start to finish. So I'm going to read, and I'm going to focus when I read. I'm going to read the abstract so that I know what the main part of the article is. And I'm going to focus on mostly the discussion section, which is down usually near the end of the article, because that's where they usually talk about, the big picture. The beginnings of articles are often literature reviews themselves, where they're talking about what other people found. And if I see something interesting in the lit review, I can take note of that and maybe see if I can find the original source for it. But for the most part, I want to find stuff that's in their results and discussion section so that I'm getting it from the actual people who did the study and not someone writing about somebody else's study. So that's where I am next. I'm going to have to actually read the articles, which is definitely my least favorite part of this process.
Okay, so I've got my pieces of paper for the different parts of information that I'm looking for so I can be organized while I take my notes. And now I need to look up these articles again. I didn't link them. I didn't like bookmark them because links break. But I've got the titles, and I know that I got them all off of the library databases. So if I just put that title in quotation marks, it should bring the article right up. And so I just need to open this up and read it. But I'm not reading like start to finish the whole thing. That's kind of pointless. So the abstract is a summary of the article, and that's going to give me a good sense of the main things that it's talking about in the article. 64.47% of the participants think that carrying out the educational activity in an online environment. Does it say who the participants are? Students. Okay, so these stats are all about students. So this I probably wrote in my notes that this article is mostly about students. And so I am going to let me go ahead and go all the way and see if they've got a discussion section. And I can always come back to the lit review if I need to. But that's just background information. Oh, this is a short article. Okay, so discussion and conclusions. 64.47 participants agreed to translate the teaching activity. I am reading through here, and this is just talking about if they liked it or not. So I guess I should check this. So this says here on, what page is this? On page 111. So Salcianu, page 111, I'm writing this down so that I can come back and look this up later, says increased participation. I'm writing this on a physical piece of paper because that's how I take notes. You can certainly take notes in a different way. You can use an annotation tool, but it's just not the way I do it. So social learning, so that's interesting. So that's kind of the flip side, because I was trying to say that people are going to feel more isolated, but this is actually saying that they feel less isolated or they feel more connected. So that's interesting. And it's okay. Like, I can still use that in my paper. I can say some people say they're more isolated, some people say they're less. So that's perfectly fine. I'm going to do a Control F to open a search, which you can't see in the frame. And so I just did the first part of isolation to see if it talks, that's a different, so that's talking about isolation because they're under quarantine because of the pandemic. So they are looking at emotional status of the students during the isolation period. Maybe I should look, I might try the word emotional then. Oh, okay, page 109 says 38.15% of students are unhappy with lack of communication and isolation from their colleagues. And then, okay, so the emotional status part that I was mentioning before is talking about fearful and afraid or sad, but that is during the pandemic isolation. And so, we probably can't attribute that merely to the online environment. So I'm not gonna show you me reading every single article and taking notes, but that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm taking notes on what I read in it, and I'm skimming through it, and I'm looking for key terms. I'm not reading each article from start to finish because it wouldn't help me find what I need. It would be really inefficient and also kind of boring.
So I read some more of the articles, and I'm kind of taking notes, like I said I would, where I've got like the topic that I'm looking for information about, and I've got the source it was in, and kind of like page numbers and stuff. So I read this one article about the faculty, and like, it turns out that their study that they did, it was a reflective study with 2 participants, and the 2 participants were the authors of the article. So they wrote about their feelings. And they tried to make it a little bit more objective. But yeah, so I wrote kind of notes, and like here, this was a quote that's relevant that I might want to look up later. And I haven't really found anything yet on just the general online experience. So hopefully my organization plan works out, because that's how I'm taking notes. If I didn't have an organization plan in mind to start with, especially if I was like assigned to read these articles, then I would probably, instead of taking notes by topic, I'd be taking notes like on the separate articles on separate pieces of paper. And then I could go back in and I could use like different colored highlighters to find parts that were relevant to different topics. But I like this way. I think it's a little bit more purposeful if I have an outline in mind. It's just that if my outline fails because I wrote it because I wrote it before I had read the articles, then I might have to redo some stuff. So we will see how that works out. You will find out later if that works out for me or if I have to redo some stuff.
Okay, so I realized that I need to make sure that I included some information from the assigned sources, or at least one of the assigned sources. And so I went back in those and I found some information. Of course, that's not going to relate specifically to like my topics about faculty experiencing isolation or students experiencing isolation. But I did find some information about, the kind of social isolation of online telework in general. And so that will definitely help. I might be able to use some information just talking about like the idea that people are doing telework, but I actually don't think I need that. I think I've got enough that's actually on my topic of social isolation, lack of face-to-face communication. So that will work, and I need to continue to work on organization. So I had kind of a plan, and now that I've looked at my sources, I need to kind of more finalize that. So I'm thinking, I want to make sure it's logically organized. So I want to start with kind of like, well, why is this an important question? And so I think general isolation and face-to-face work, and if I have some stuff on just the fact that people are working online more, that would be fine to include as well. So I'll start probably with that, general isolation in face-to-face work, and that'll get me the assigned sources, and then I don't know if I'm going to talk about the students or not, because I think I've got enough with the general like online experience and the faculty. I think I've got enough to just do that. So I can always go back and add in stuff about students later if I need to fluff it out. But I didn't have that much about students anyways. So then I will talk about faculty isolation in particular. And so I remember originally I was thinking that I would do kind of like maybe they're isolated from their colleagues, they're isolated from the administration, and isolated from their students. I think that'll work. That's what I started my focus on, and that should work. I don't have to second guess myself and then have to go back in and do that. So let's start with from administrators. And I know I've got something about lacking face-to-face with management in one of the general sources that isn't related to faculty. So I can, if I don't mention that here, I can definitely tie it in here or just kind of like refer back to it. And then we'll do a paragraph or two about colleagues, which I know there was a lot in one of my sources about that. And I didn't have a ton about isolation from students, but I think I've got enough. I could write at least one paragraph about that, maybe two. So the question is this going to be long enough for the lit review, which is supposed to be 4 to 6 pages, I think. I'll have probably a half a page as kind of an introduction, kind of leading up to it. And then this part, general isolation, could be probably another half page. So that makes 1. It's going to be close. So I think this gives me enough to get started. And maybe as I write this, I might come up with some ideas about places that I can elaborate more, or if I need kind of a different idea. Oh, like, I know. So this point can be about the experience of isolation. And one of my sources had a ton of information about like next steps, recommendations, solutions. So if I need more length, that's actually a logical place to put that, where we're kind of starting with the general isolation and the faculty experience, and then what to do. I don't think that's super necessary to the direction I want to go with my paper, but if I need more length, that's definitely the way I can go. So drafting is my next step, and actually that's probably the step that I like the best. So I'm going to gather all this stuff together, and I'm going to, write like a thesis and topic sentences, and kind of, and I'm going to focus first on like what I want to say, and I'm going to, cite the sources if I think of them as I go, or come back in and get them later. I'm not going to start with an info dump from the sources. I'm going to start with kind of my plan here and my general memory of the sources. That way it comes together as like a proper paper and not an info dump where I'm just kind of regurgitating information from sources. So that's my next step. Okay, let me show you what I've got for drafting and revising. So I had all those notes from the different sources. And what I did was I got like a separate piece of paper for each like paragraph or section that I wanted to write stuff about. And then I wrote it down on this online scrap paper. This is Slimy Gloop laboratory instructions, right? Whatever I had lying around in the house. For me personally, being able to kind of jot it down in ink on the scrap paper makes it easier for me to get my thoughts out. Whereas if I try to type my essay on the computer first, I feel like I'm doing a final draft. I feel like I have to start at the beginning. I feel like I have to get my margins right. I feel like I have to say it the right way. And so this lets me, it's faster for me, honestly, to write a paper this way and then type it up afterwards than to sit at the computer and feel like I'm doing something wrong. So basically, right, I've got a whole bunch of, and some of these are the notes. And so then what I did was I opened up a Google Doc and I typed it into a Google Doc. And I went ahead and formatted it in APA, mostly because that kind of kills time and I didn't have to think too hard about it. And so I typed up basically what I had here, but as I went, I might make changes here or there to what I wrote. And I have like here, I didn't stop to look up what year that article was published in. I just wrote that I knew I needed to add the year for APA format, and I would do that later. And so after I typed all that up, I went in and I added like this extra blank space between each paragraph so that I'd have plenty of room for elaborating, for adding transitions and that sort of thing. And I printed it on campus so that I didn't have to use my own precious printer ink. And then I just kind of read through it and tried to think about, is there something missing here? Do I need to add a transition? And so this, like when I was worried about length, right? And when I typed up my original notes from writing on that, it came out to, I think, just over 3 pages.
and it was supposed to be 4 to 6. And so I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be okay on length because I did need to go back in and add some explanations, transitions, and so on. So I think I'm going to be good on length. I have not typed this up yet. I'm probably not going to film that. I'll just go ahead and type in all this stuff and edit if I need to. But mostly because I'm switching back and forth between doing it by hand and typing it, it gives me more opportunities to revise and edit as I go, as opposed to feeling like, revision is this last process that I have to do after I already wrote my paper. I'm doing it at the same time. So I will type all this up and edit more or less as I go. I will double check that the sources that I mentioned in here are the same ones as I've got on my works cited page. I checked that earlier, but I'm going to check it one more time, add in any, there's a few places I think where I wanted to add another citation or a page number for a citation. And so I'll have to look back at my sources again for that. But I think I'm going to be okay on length. With all the extra space added in here, this comes out onto page 6, but the title page doesn't count. So that would be onto page 5. So it should be around 4 pages when I'm done. If not, I did have that stuff about student isolation that I could add, or if it's real close, there may just be places where I could actually expand this conclusion. It's a little bit brief. I could do more of a bridge into what I want to talk about next in the primary research. But I think for the most part, I am good on this, and when next you see me, I will have something beautiful and ready to share with others. So I typed up the last things that I wanted to add. I compared my paper to an example paper to make sure I got the formatting correct for the title page. I do need to, as a last thing, check the citations to make sure that the citations in the paper exactly match the ones on the reference page. And I also got out the rubric for this assignment and made sure that there wasn't anything I was missing that I would be counted off for if I turn this in, like the number of sources, kinds of transitions, that sort of thing. At this point, once I finish checking my citations, looks like I'm done. So in the end, am I happy with the paper I put out? I wish I could say I was really happy with it. I'm not 100% happy with it. I went through the instructions and everything. I made sure that it follows the assignment. But I wish that it felt more organic. I wish that it felt more focused, more about the research question and less about shoving information from sources in, which is probably how a lot of students feel. They probably feel like, they're trying to check the boxes to finish the assignment, and a literature review is not a very fulfilling assignment in most cases. I might come back to this paper next semester when I've got a little distance from it and, revise it and try to make it more smooth, more focused. Right now I'm on a deadline. I'm recording this. This should be the last clip that I'm recording, and I'm recording this on the day that I introduced this paper to my students. I hoped that I'd have the video ready by today, but it's going to be at least a couple more days for me to edit and upload this. Anyways, if you found this video useful, go ahead and comment below. Tell me what was useful about it to you, what you might like to hear about other papers that I write for my students. You can also check out my other videos about writing papers and formatting. I hope that helps. Thanks a lot.